This is the official website of Sass, and if we go to their installation tab, you can see that before we can install Sass, we need to install Node and npm package manager. So you need to go to nodejs.org and then download the version for your computer. And once you have Node.js and npm installed, we can copy this command and paste it in our terminal somewhere and hit enter, and this will install the Sass package globally in our computer. Let's just verify that Sass is installed by doing sass -- version, and you can see the Sass version here which you have installed. Now that Sass is set up, let's create our first Sass file. And Sass actually offers two syntaxes for their files. The first one is SCSS, which is similar to CSS. It uses the same curly braces and semicolons that we are used from CSS. And it also comes with Sass format, which is the indented syntax. This syntax uses indentation instead of curly braces to define the blocks, but the more common one is SCSS format because it's very similar to CSS and it's also very popular. So here I have this portfolio website that we are going to convert to Sass format. And let's create our first Sass file. So the way we choose the format of this file is by defining the file names. And here we can either name this SCSS or we can name this Sass. And this will define the format, whether we are going to use the indented syntax or SCSS syntax. So in our case, let's just use the SCSS format. For now, let's just copy and paste everything that we have inside of our style.css into our style.scss. And this is still a perfectly fine syntax in Sass. You can use the same regular CSS in Sass files. In this case, you're just not leveraging the features that Sass provides you. But as a starting point, we will just copy and paste all of our CSS files here, and then we'll convert these styles one by one. Now if we go to our index.html file, you can see that our browser still reads from the style.css, and it's important to understand that browsers cannot interpret the preprocessor code. So browsers can only understand the standard CSS, and you need to compile your preprocessor code to CSS and then provide them with the pure CSS file. So we need to compile our SCSS into CSS file, and that is why we installed the Sass package here. So to compile our SCSS into CSS format, we will use this command. We will do sass -- watch, and this will watch the files in real time. And then the first file name is the SCSS file, which is style.scss. And then the second file name is the path to the file where it needs to write the compiled code, which is style.css. If I hit enter, you can see that it starts to compile the file and watches it in real time. And this means that it continuously watches the SCSS file, and whenever there are changes to your Sass file, it will automatically recompile it into the CSS. And you'll notice it also creates this style.css.map, which is the mapping file between SCSS and CSS files. And here we have all of these styles from the SCSS, which are just compiled by this compiler. And if we open our website in the browser, you can see that we have the same styles, but these are now coming from our Sass file. So let's convert the navbar styles into Sass format and also learn the features along the way. And that is this header part in our HTML file where we have the navbar with the logo and with the nav items. So the first feature that we will learn is nesting, which is we can nest our CSS styles into each other as we have them in the HTML file. For example, you can see our navbar class is located inside of the header. And that means that I can move this navbar inside of our header tag and save this. And if you open up the terminal, you can see it compiles again and moves the styles to the CSS. Here you can see it converts it to header and then navbar inside of it. But in this Sass file, we have a more convenient way of writing this, which is navbar inside of the header. Next, you can see we have a media query here for the tablets and mobile phones. And in CSS, we used to write this separately below the header. But since we are using Sass, we can move this media query here inside of the header. And here we don't need to specify the header anymore because this media query applies to that header which is inside of it. We can just set the padding to 0 as we had it here, and we can get rid of this completely. And the same applies to the navbar. We can apply a media query here. So we'll copy and paste the same media query here. And we can just apply these styles, which is padding 16 pixels and padding bottom 0. And with that, we can get rid of this media query completely. Now, if we save and go back, you can see there is no difference in this styling, but we have a much convenient way of writing these styles in this Sass file. Another useful thing in Sass files is the mixins. And mixins are just a way for us to extract the reusable parts in our CSS. For example, you can notice we are using a lot of flexbox in our navbar. And this is where we can create a reusable mixin. So we can go to our files and create a new file. And usually we call this file _mixins.scss. And here we will locate all of our CSS mixins. You define a mixin with this syntax and then you give it a name. For the first one, let's say we are creating the flex row. So this will be our flex box where we set the flex direction to row, and we can reuse this in many places. And inside of this I can set the styles. So I will set the display to flex and I will set the flex direction to row, or I can just get rid of this because that's the default value and save this. And now if we go back to our style.css, and in order to use that mixin, we need to define that at the top of our file. So we will use the use syntax and then the mixin name, which is mixins. And now we can use that flex row that we defined in our mixin. So here I can get rid of this display flex and I can just use include mixins and then the flex row mixin inside of that. And now wherever we are using that display flex, we can just include the mixin that we are using. You can see that for now we just replaced one line with one line, and that doesn't get rid of many extra code. But we can extend our mixin further and provide it with arguments. For example, I can provide it with justify content argument, and we need to set the value of it when it's not provided. So we'll set it to space between. Then we will also accept the align items property, and by default I'll set this to center. And we'll also accept the gap property, and I'll set this to 0 by default. And with that, now we can extend this further. I can set the justify content to the justify content argument that was provided. I can similarly set the align items to the argument provided, and the same goes for the gap property. Now since the default value here for justify content is space between and for align items it's center, we can get rid of these two properties here. And soon you will see how we are using the arguments of it in the below code. Now we can move further to the logo wrapper, which is located inside of our navbar. So we can move our logo wrapper to the inside of our navbar class. And here we are using display flex, and we are also aligning items to the center. And that are the default values of our flex row. So we can completely get rid of them and just include the flex row mixin here. Next, inside of the logo wrapper, we have this image and the heading. So the image class is logo image, and that is this logo image class here. So we can move this inside of the logo wrapper as well. And also the logo, which is this heading from here, we can also move that inside of our logo wrapper. Next we have this nav list. Now this nav list is inside of the navbar, so we will not place it inside of the logo wrapper, but instead we will place it below it, which is still under the navbar. We'll cut this styles from here and apply it inside of the navbar class. Here is another opportunity for us to use our flex row mixin. Here we can use include mixins and the flex row mixin. And here is where we will provide it with the arguments. So you can see we are using gap 32 pixels, and we can provide it with the $sign and gap and then the 32 pixels in front of it. And then we can get rid of these two lines after that. You can see below that we also had this media query which was applied to the nav list, and we can copy this media query and paste it below the nav list. And we don't need to specify the nav list as you saw before. We can just set this to display none, and we can get rid of this nav list property from here. Next we have this burger icon which is only visible for the mobile view, and that is this image here, and this is the class of it, burger icon. And this is also located inside of the same navbar, so we can move these styles of that inside of the navbar below the nav list. And similar to what we did above, we can move this media query inside of the burger icon, and we can apply the display block here, and we can get rid of this media query. And the last styles that we have that apply to the navbar are these styles which are applied to the nav item inside of our nav list. And you can see we have styles for the nav list here. So we will cut these styles from the bottom and we'll move them inside of our nav list below the media query. And if we save our file and go back to our browser, you can see that our navbar looks exactly the same as we had before, but we are now using these Sass properties. And this code is much easier for us to read and also work with instead of just pure CSS file. And the last feature that we'll explore here is the variables. Sass also comes with variables which you can define in any CSS file like this, and then you can reuse them wherever you want them. In our case, you can see we are repeating this 1024 pixels a lot for all of the media queries and also for some cases for the maximum width. And that is where we can extract this into a variable of Sass. For example, we can name this to be desktop width and we can set this to be 1024 pixels. And now we can select the first occurrence of 1024 and then select all of the others with Command D. And we can replace all of them with the desktop width variable that we defined above. And we still have our same layout, but now we are using the variables. And whenever you find yourself repeating the same spacing or the same color again and again, you can use the variables of Sass. Now CSS also comes with variables. For example, we are using the color variables of CSS. But you can use both of them in combination. You can use the CSS variables and also the Sass variables, or you can choose one of them, either Sass or CSS variables, and use all of them across your app. And once we are done with compiling our Sass code, you can see our compiler is still running and it watches for the changes. You can exit out of this with Ctrl+C and this will stop the compilation process. And now this Sass file won't be used anymore. We have this style.css, which is the compiled version of that Sass. So these are the most commonly used features in Sass. Now let's look at some advanced features that Sass offers, and the first one we'll look at is partials. We already used partials in our mixins.scss. We can organize our style sheets into smaller and more manageable files with partials, and typically we define partials with the starting underscore and then the file name. And these files are not directly compiled into CSS, and instead we use them with the use keyword in our other styles, and then we can use the reusable pieces where needed. The next feature that we have is modules, which are similar to partials, but they offer a more advanced way to encapsulate CSS styles and then prevent naming conflicts. For example, let's convert our theme.css into a module. Let's copy these styles from here and create another file here called theme.scss. Let's paste this here and first let's convert this into Sass variables. So we'll remove the root wrapper here and let's rename these variables into Sass format. So we will use the $sign and then primary color and then $sign gray color and same for background and white colors. And now we can use the export functionality of Sass, so we can do export. And here we'll define the variables that we are going to export. So the first one will be the primary color. And in front of it, we place the variable of primary color. And then let's do the same for all of the other colors. So the second one will be the gray color. Next, we have the background color. And lastly, we have the white color. Let's save this and also convert this file into a CSS file. And from this point, you'll notice that our SCSS files are growing. So we have the theme.scss and then we have this style and we might have more. And instead of converting them one by one as we did previously, so we can do Sass watch and then do the same for the theme and then do the same for the style. But there is a shorthand for compiling all of these SCSS files into CSS files in our directory. And for that, we will use the same sass-watch command. But here for the first argument, we will specify the input directory, which is the directory where all of our SCSS files are located. And that is the root directory in our case. So I will do dot here. And then we separate it like this. And the second part is the output directory, which is where the compiled CSS files will be located. And we will still use the root for this. And this means that we are compiling all of our SCSS files in the root into CSS files, also in the root directory. If I hit enter, this will start to watch for the style.scss file and also for the theme.scss file and also any other files that we will create in the future. It will watch for all of the future files and it will convert all of them to CSS format. So let's hide the terminal now and let's use these variables into our style.css. For now, if we go back to our website, you can see that the colors have disappeared and that's because we are not using these variables yet. Let's go back to our style.scss and let's import these theme variables. And we do that with the same use keyword and then we specify the file name and then we import it like this. And now to use these theme variables, we need to find where we specified colors in our styles. For example, we can find the place where we specified the gray color and here we can do the Command D and select all of the occurrences, but an easier way in VS Code is to do Command Shift L and this will select all of the gray colors here. So if you scroll down, you can see that all of them are selected. And here instead of our CSS variables, now we will use our Sass variables. So we will do $gray-color. and this will use our gray color in our styles. And similarly, we need to change all of the 4 colors. So the next one is the background color, and we will again do Command Shift L, and this is Control Shift L probably on Windows. And then you do the same $, and then background color in this time. Now let's find some occurrences of the primary color. So let's search for primary, and we will select the primary color, again Command Shift L, and we will do primary color. And the last one is white color, so let's search for the white color here, and let's also select all occurrences, and let's rename this to be white color. Now if we save this and open the terminal, you can see it already compiled our styles into style.css. So if you open up the browser, you can see some of our colors are back, but the background isn't applied, and also some minor styles. And that is because we also have this global.css, which uses the old CSS variables. So let's also convert this file into a CSS format. So let's copy all of these styles and create a new file called global.scss, and let's paste all of these here. At the top, we will import our theme variables. So we will do use theme and like this. And now we are using this background color here, for example. Let's select all of the occurrences, and that's just only one in this case. And let's use the background color here instead. For the white, we will use our white color. And for the gray, we will select all of them, and we will use the gray color. And if we save this and open the terminal, you can see that our command already noticed the global.scss, and it already compiled it into global CSS. And we forgot about our primary color, so let's also convert all of these into our primary color and save. And with that, we can go back to our browser. You can see that all of our colors are back, and now we are using Sass variables instead of CSS variables. And we are also using Sass modules in the theme.scss. The next feature that we will learn is the extend functionality in Sass, and that allows us to add inheritance in our files. For example, if we go to our global SCSS, you can see we have a button here that we are using across our app. And this actually can be a good use case for the extend functionality. So we can copy all of our button styles, and let's create a reusable styles here. We define that with percentage and then the style name. In our case, let's name this button base. And here we can paste all of our styles, and in the button, instead of using all of our styles, we can do extend and then the name of our styles, which is the button base, and we forgot to place the E here. And why is this useful? Well, for now it's not very useful because we are just reusing the same styles only once. But let's say we want to have multiple versions of our button. For example, we want to have a success button that will look in green, and we want to have our warning button that will look in yellow, and so on. In this case, we don't need to define these styles again, so we can just use one extend here, and now we can define the success version of this button, for example. We can do end.success, which means all of the buttons that have success class attached to them. And here we can add only the success styles without touching this. We can maybe just copy the border here and change the color of it. Instead of primary color, let's say this is in green color. And then similarly, we can do that for the warning button. We can create a warning button, and let's say the border of this will be in orange. And similarly, we can also change the hover functionality of it. So when hovering for the base button, we will have this color, but we can define different colors for the success button, for example. We may define a bit lighter yellow here, and we might also do the same for the warning button. And now with that, we can use our success and warning buttons very easily. If we go back to our index.html and find somewhere where we are using the button, for example in the first section, we have this contact button at the top, and let's say we want this to be a success button. All we have to do is to name this as success class and save. And if we go back to our browser, you can see that now it looks like the success button, and the hover effect is not applied, and that's because we did a minor mistake here. So in case of the hover, we don't want to set the border of it, but instead background color, and we don't need this first part on it, only the color. If we save it like this and go back, now this is our success color, and if we want this to be a warning color, all we have to do is to change this to warning and save. And now this is back to the warning color. And if we don't apply any class, then it's our base button, which we defined in our global.scss. That's the extend functionality, and now let's look at the functions in Sass. We already defined one function in our mixin.scss, and that is the flex row. For example, here we are passing the arguments to it like justify content, align items, and also gap, and then we apply it here. So this is a use case of Sass functions. And similarly, we may also create another mixin here. And this one can be for flex column, and this will be used in all of the occurrences where we use the flex direction to column instead of row. So we can actually copy all of these and place it here, and the only difference here will be that the flex direction is set to column for this one. Or instead of these two, you can use one reusable function. For example, you can name this as flex, and in the first argument you can also accept the flex direction of it, and by default you can set this to row, and then we also have to set it here. And you can use this flex for all of your flex box and just define the flex direction and all of the other properties. And with that, you don't have to repeat all of these styles again in your code. And the last feature is operators, and operators are actually very simple. These are just operators like plus, minus, multiply, and so on, and you can use them in your SCSS files. For example, instead of 32, we can say 16 times 2 pixels in the header. And that is exactly the same. It will do the calculation for you automatically. And then if you look at your style.css, you can see that it is converted to 42 pixels. And this can be useful in some cases. For example, if you want your base spacing to be 4 pixels and all of your spacings, you want them to be multiplies of that 4 pixels. You can do calculations like this or any other calculations that you can think of. Here, obviously, it doesn't make sense, so I will revert this back to be 42 pixels. And now we can open our terminal. You can see all of the files were converted to CSS format, and we can stop the compilation with Ctrl+C and exit of this. And these are all the features that you need to know about Sass. And Sass is just one of the preprocessors. There are many more like less, stylus, and others. But you don't need to learn every CSS preprocessor that's out there. And once you know one preprocessor, it's very easy to get started with others. And in our project, we only converted the header styles to the SCSS format. The rest of our styles are still in pure CSS. And as a practice for you, you can use this portfolio website and convert all of the other sections into SCSS format by using variables, nesting, mixins, and more. And the key is to just practice. The more you use it, the more comfortable you will become with its features and with the workflow of Sass and other preprocessors.